Hello and welcome to tonight's show. We are playing the game of life and I am your host, Rachel. This edition is titled Pits and Pitfalls, and please welcome our studio contestant tonight, Mr. J. These vignettes are going to be real situations taken from the life of Mr. J, and as we replay them for him, we're going to give him the opportunity, along with you at home, to play multiple choice. Play along with us and see how your life will game out. Vignette number 1. You're the youngest kid in a pretty big family. It's a blended family, so there's a few half-brothers hanging around. You've all grown up together and there's only about a 10-year age gap between the oldest to the youngest, so you get on well together. It's pretty cool having your own family soccer team. You are the only child of your mother, though, and she couldn't have kids for a long time, so you're pretty special to her and your dad. After a few years, Mum gets pregnant again, and there's lots of excitement to see if you're going to have a baby brother or sister. Here's the pit. Your brother's birth is pretty tough, and unfortunately your mum doesn't survive. Here you are, just a young preschooler, suddenly without the person you love most in the world, a new baby brother who's getting all the attention, and a grieving, devastated father. J, do you A, rage that life is unfair and get angry at God for letting this happen to you? B, decide to hate your brother forever because your mum died giving birth to him? Or C, treasure the memories you have of your mum and pull closer to the family that you still have around you? For you listening at home, just think about any times that you might have faced a similar pit of disappointment and loss. A time when something or someone was suddenly taken from you. Maybe a parent or a family member did die. Maybe your family finances took a nosedive, or you were fired from a job and financial security was suddenly lost. It can be tempting to play the victim card and to blame God, the universe, or blame the situation and the people around you. Unfortunately, those are the very actions and attitudes that are going to keep you tethered in that pit. Mr. J here took the only course of action that let him move forward. He loved his little brother, chose to be thankful he had at least that living reminder of his beloved mum, and he went on living to honour her memory. Vignette number 2. As he grew, Jay became increasingly known as his father's favourite. We know in part that he was loved for the sake of his beloved mother, but also he was a pretty helpful guy around the house. He kind of earned that favour. He obeyed his dad when asked to go on errands, and he helped his dad keep an eye on his big bros, how they were managing the family business. In fact, Jay was so good and so enthused about where life was going to take him that it led Jay to the pitfall of pride. Pride goes before a fall. Jay had an eye for the big guy, and that big guy was him. He had dreams of grandeur, that one day he was going to rule it all. Now, here are the options. If you've ever had a time that you can see something's finally going your way, your life seems on a path to success, maybe it's that time you're offered sponsorship for your visa, or you get chosen for a great job with good pay that it had heaps of other candidates applying, but you were chosen. Maybe even like Jay, you seem to be the favourite sibling of your parents. Do you? A, go around telling everyone how awesome your life is and take all the credit that you deserve all the blessings you're getting. B, make other people around you feel bad by sharing all your good stuff without caring how they might feel and without letting them share their perspective on your plans. Or do you, C, share the blessings as a praise report, recognizing that all the good stuff comes from God, and journal or perhaps share with a trusted few what your future dreams and plans are so that you can seek wise counsel and keep building your faith for their fulfillment? Unfortunately, young Jay here went for options A and B, and that stirred up a lot of strife and trouble in his family. The story goes that his brothers hated him. They were jealous of him. They could not speak peaceably to him at all. By now, you've probably guessed that Mr. J here is Joseph, the son of Jacob. If you're not familiar with his story, I really encourage you, go to Genesis. It's the very first book of the Bible, and you can read all about him from chapters 35 to 50. It's a great story, one that you can sit down and read in one sitting, and it's going to help you really understand this game of life and how to make your choices count as well. It brings us to vignette number 3, the pit of betrayal. Whether by a person or a situation, betrayal or abandonment is something that I'm sure we've all experienced in some form. Maybe your agent advised you poorly and you missed a good opportunity to improve your visa chances. Maybe your boss has failed to fulfill the promised sponsorship despite you working hard and doing everything that you were required at your end of the agreement. Maybe your housemates have done something to damage the apartment and they leave it all up to you to clean and to pay for the repair bill. Well, for Joseph, you see, he was grabbed by his brothers, stripped of his tunic and thrown into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water. Betrayal does strip you of your outer layer, and it reveals what is truly in your heart and what you value. So, hands on buzzers, pick your choice. Do you A, hide from or cover up your own vulnerability by pointing the blame at other people again and putting on whatever you can find? This robe is called self-righteousness, and the Bible calls it like filthy rags. Do you B, curl up in a ball of misery and depression, give up and stop trying anymore? Or option C, do you introspect and understand if and when and what you could have done differently, learn from this experience to, if possible, avoid it happening again? Well, I contend that Mr. Joseph here did do some soul searching, and he humbled himself before God to realize that he'd been pretty arrogant and careless of how to treat other people well, and he'd actually had that fall coming. In his future interactions, we see a changed man. We see someone who realizes you don't get ahead by pushing other people out of the way, but by in fact serving others and knowing how to work peaceably and cooperatively with others, which Joseph had a chance to practice very soon in the pit of slavery. Hopefully no one listening has ever experienced true slavery, but I know for sure we have all had situations and seasons where we've had to do things we've not really felt like doing or wanted to do. Compulsory study because you're on a student visa, compulsory work because you need money to live. Maybe you've felt stuck in a job that feels genuinely like a form of slavery, serving someone else's vision and pocket, but you know it's not quite time to move on yet. Of course, there is wisdom here. Please don't just get stuck in a situation for the sake of it. There are times when change is appropriate, and you should seek that prayerfully and seek counsel if you're unsure. But can I say, if you're genuinely in a situation, as Joseph was at this time, of serving someone else's agenda, doing something because you have to rather than because you want to, can I encourage you to cultivate the attitude that says, God, I know you are in this with me. As it said in Genesis 39 verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph and he was a successful man. Here are your options when you're in that time of slavery. Option A, bring your best effort, serve with a spirit of excellence and prove yourself trustworthy. Option B, work grudgingly, do just what is required and not much more. Complain in your heart and criticize your boss for the way they make you work. Or option C, be two-faced. Show your good worker side when anybody's watching, especially the boss, but secretly take some shortcuts or take advantage of your position for personal gain. Trust me, I have seen people taking options B and C. Good on Joseph for going the route of option A. Now, by this stage, I do wonder what Joseph was feeling. He's gone from being the spoiled favorite of his father, dreaming of having other people bow to him, to now he is the one bowing to an Egyptian master and having to serve and cater to every whim and selfish pleasure of his master. It's not unreasonable for Joseph to feel that he has the right to some reward for all his years of faithful service. Isn't there that voice inside each of us? I mean, especially after we've pushed through and done something pretty hard or challenging, that's, that little voice that says, come on, you deserve a little reward for your efforts. Which, it's fine and true. I'm often tempted to have a square of dark chocolate after a challenging day at work. I know my kids are very tempted to sit on the iPad and to play after I've had them concentrating to do some homework. But when temptation comes knocking, and it will, you still have to know the consequences of saying yes or no to that temptation, and be prepared to run if you need to take that escape route. You see, Joseph was trusted now in his master's house, and there would have been temptations of many kinds for him to take advantage of that day by day. In fact, the temptation we read in the Bible was that of Potiphar's wife, by all accounts a beautiful woman. Joseph was a young, healthy, hormonal young man. And it says that Potiphar's wife spoke to Joseph day by day. By day. This is not just one-off temptation. This is a daily temptation before Joseph. Do you, in that same situation, tempted by whatever it is that grabs you and grips your desire? Choice A, allow temptation to keep enticing you, playing with fire, resisting it but never fully rejecting it, thinking, it's okay, I can handle this, I'll keep saying no. Option B, do you give in and go with it? Don't think or care about what the consequences are going to be, you just give in to desire. Or option C, do you stand firm, resist temptation, in fact reject temptation, take the option like Joseph needed to and flee from it, run so temptation is not in front of you or before you anymore. There are still consequences. Hopefully, good ones, blessing, but it may not always show up straight away. As in Joseph's life, this took him from the frying pan into the fire. He went from temptation into the pit of injustice. Joseph was wrongly accused of adultery, the very temptation that he had fled from to resist. Thrown into prison, misunderstood, not listened to, cast out, and trapped in a situation with no way out. Have you ever felt unfairly treated? Overlooked for that promotion or opportunity? Trapped maybe, paying the price or the consequence of someone else's poor decisions or misdemeanors? I know that some of you are, potentially paying the consequences and the price for the decisions of a spouse or a parent, perhaps having gambled away the family funds, or where maybe you've been the subject of slanderous gossip against your business or against your person. For example, it's too easy these days on Google reviews or Instagram or Facebook comments to write slanderous gossip, and it may put you in a pit of injustice. There's still some choices here. Are you going to A, retaliate, look for a way to take revenge and make them pay? B, are you going to hold all the emotion inside, stuff it inside, ignore that injustice that's put you there and just put your head down, work it out, strive, problem solve, and find a way to get yourself out of that pit yourself? Or option C, are you going to double down in leaning on God, trusting him when he says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord? Let him take care of the injustice. Don't ignore the hurt and the injustice, but acknowledge it and surrender it to him, while you also keep your eyes open for the positives and the potential in this new situation. As Joseph did, thrown into that prison, he didn't just curl up in a ball or yell and scream and rant and rage. He looked for the opportunities. How could he help? How could he use his gifts to serve others in this new situation, as unjust as it seemed? Now, unfortunately, there is another pitfall of delay. If you think about it, once he was in there and he had the trust of the jailer, Joseph actually had the opportunity to potentially escape the prison. On one front, he had interpreted Pharaoh's baker and butler's dreams. He'd requested the butler to remember him and to plead his case to Pharaoh when he was released. Day by day, by day by day by day went by, and still no news No feedback. They didn't have Facebook or Newsflash or anything like that. Joseph was literally ignorant as to what had happened outside the four walls of his prison. But what was going on in his head? I mean, seriously, has he forgotten me? Has Pharaoh heard my story and he just doesn't even care? Am I going to grow old in here and die? In the waiting season, and we've all had them, the time when it feels like your dreams, your desires, your prayers, they're all on pause. It feels like, God, have you forgotten me? In actual fact, Joseph had the possibility. He had the keys. He was trusted. He could have walked out of that prison. He could have been physically free, but without the official pardon, he would not have been truly free. That would be option A. If you were to get impatient, waiting for God's timing and just find a way to make progress happen yourself. It's the same thing Abraham did with Ishmael. Got impatient on waiting for God's timing and stepped out in his own strength and ability to make something happen. Not God's way, not God's timing. Option B, do you give up? Do you let the dreams fade? Just settle into being mediocre and comfortable? Don't bother serving anymore or just go through the motions. Your prayer becomes stagnant and half-hearted and maybe you don't even pray anymore. What's the point? God's forgotten you. Or option C, are you, like Joseph, willing to let patience have its perfect work in you, that you may be found complete and perfect, lacking nothing, as it encourages us in James 1:4. This was 2 years. 2 years of Joseph staying faithful, 2 years of holding on to faith that God was still working things out. Joseph was taken to the palace, we know the story, and he was put in charge of the grain stores and looking after the harvest from the Egyptian grain fields. But there is another pit of famine here, a pit of lack. You know, it might not seem like it, but this is in fact one of the biggest pits that Joseph faces. Before, it was just about him. Now, this pit is about a whole nation. It's about survival. Before, it was just about his feelings and his friendships, but now it is genuinely about the survival of the human race. By now, however, Joseph has developed that character of wisdom to turn the pit into potential. The greatest famine that could literally wipe out the entire human race, Joseph turned that into the opportunity for Egypt to be wise, to stockpile their grain, and to be able to provide amply to their own people and ultimately the surrounding nations, which ultimately led to the wealth, generating the wealth that founded one of the biggest dynasties in human history, the Egyptian dynasty that built all the pyramids and the Sphinx and all the wonders of the Egyptian culture that we know of today. Mr. J, straight to the top of your class, you have reached the mountaintop. Hasn't that been a bit of fun to play multiple choice game of life tonight? Hope you've enjoyed it. But I want to leave you in this final moment with 2 takeaway thoughts. The first is to realize that in this life, you will surely face pits and pitfalls, sometimes through your own choices, but equally not always because of anything you've done or not done. Joseph faced circumstance after circumstance that from the outside looked like a pit. From disappointment to pride and betrayal, slavery, temptation, unjust imprisonment, delay, and then even famine and loss and lack. On the outside, Joe was just going from pit to pit to pit to pit. But what was true about his circumstances was, I believe, actually the exact opposite of his life. The inner life, the mindset, the character, the true life of Joseph from the inside. We talk about him going from the prison to the palace as though he went from rock bottom to the mountaintop in a moment. And sure, that was certainly true of his circumstance. But when we look at the life of Joseph the man, I believe it is more accurately described as Joseph going from strength to strength to strength to strength. You see, Joseph the man, he hadn't been in a pit really since his early teens, when his own pride and arrogance inevitably caused him to, it caused his downfall at that time. Every situation he'd faced since then had been taking him upward and closer to the mature overcomer. It's a bit of fun to play multiple choice, but what I hope you've grasped today is that no matter what situation you're in, you get to choose the outcome. You get to choose how you're going to respond and react to what happens. Sure, you don't always get to choose or control what happens to you or around you, but how you respond, how you think, how you choose to get up and keep going is really in your hands. The second take-home point I want to leave you with today is, I believe, the attitude, the strength that helped Joseph to keep choosing the growth response in his pits. Not the easy or the natural or the instinctive human response perhaps, but the right one that helped him to grow. Joseph was able to maintain his trust that God was still working things out, that God had a purpose and a plan that was bigger than his own comfort or discomfort, as the case was. In everything he faced, he was able to trust that God was working his bigger plan and purpose. It's the same with us. Whatever we face, whatever situation, whether it seems the result of our own choices or external circumstances pressing on us, there's always something that God is working and a purpose and a plan if we allow him to do that work in us. I dare say it's usually to do with our own character growth and maturity. If we can just realize it, if we can just open our heart and understand what God is trying to help us to grow and change and increase in, then we can actually cooperate and we can accelerate the process to break through. In Joseph's life, we see that he learned patience. It was 22 years from the time he had that first dream to its fulfillment in welcoming his brothers back in the courts of Egypt, with lots of detours on the way, lots of times when it looked absolutely impossible for those dreams to happen. I wonder, have you yet waited and grown that patience for 22 years? Have you even waited for 2 years? Keep going. God's got a work of patience he wants to do in your heart. Joseph also learnt humility. He went from a cocky teenager shouting his own grandness in front of everybody to a man with humility, able to give the credit where credit was due, pointing to God as the source of his strength. In Genesis 41, verse 16, he said to Pharaoh, "It is not in me, but God will give Pharaoh an answer." And he proceeded to then be the vessel that God used to give Pharaoh the answer. True humility, knowing that your strength, your blessing, your favor, your promotion doesn't come from you, but it is the favor and the blessing and the Spirit of God working on the inside of you, and all glory goes to him. But I believe probably one of the most powerful things that Joseph really learned and demonstrated through his journey was the attitude of gratitude. Being able, in all the circumstances and situations, to keep his eyes on the positive things, on the opportunities, on the things that he could be thankful for, even in the middle of struggle and difficulty. We see that even in the way he named his sons, his eldest Manasseh means, God has made me forget all my toil and father's house. And his second son, Ephraim, God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Despite all the hardship and challenge, his eyes, his heart, his words even were focused on the blessing, the fruitfulness, the favor, the opportunities that God had brought him through. We can get so focused in our moment that we forget God works in lifetimes and in generations. We need to learn to trust that in each moment, in whatever we're in that moment, that God is working out a bigger plan. He's got a big roadmap, a master plan, and he's weaving not just us, but the people around us into his master plan. We don't see it, we don't always understand it, but we can trust him. He's got it under control. If you can keep this attitude to trust that God has a bigger plan, then you too can learn to make every pit into a divine potential. I believe that as we go tonight, and it might even be an interesting exercise for you to look back on your own life and almost play a game of life with your own milestones and challenges and struggles and situations that you've faced. Maybe the situations you are facing and wrestling and struggling with right now. And just give yourself a moment to set up a multiple choice. If I do A, B, or C, ask yourself, can I take this in a way that's going to trust God has a plan, not just in this moment, but in my future? And to be able to take the choice that's going to lead you from pit to divine potential. And it is all for the glory of God. Amen.